Hello everyone, I am Gabriel and I am here together with my colleague Johan. We are the co-founders of D-Books, and D-Books is a platform that enables DApp to user communication on the internet computer.
There has been increased interest in security and privacy-focused messaging since Snowden's revelations in 2013 about mass surveillance of communication. End-to-end encrypted messengers have become more widely used, with many of the popular apps having it enabled by default or as an option. Each of the current most used messaging applications is based on a centralized model, with the most popular ones being WhatsApp, WeChat, Facebook Messenger, Snapchat and Telegram, for example. However, though, surveys have shown that users are more interested in decentralized messaging services than a centralized one.
So, you may ask, what is the problem with centralized messaging services? Well, they have limited availability because they have single points of failure. And also, the provider of a centralized messaging service may be malicious. And even if the rest of the party isn't malicious, there can be insiders that are. And even if the provider, every one of those are not malicious, they can be acquired by another party that have other intentions that they do. For an example, WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook for $22 billion. And the co-founder Acton said that Facebook had different intentions in terms of privacy than they had. Furthermore, centralized services have limited transparency, because even if they are open source, the users cannot be guaranteed that the code hasn't been altered of what is running on their backend services. And lastly, the metadata of messages in a centralized service, the provider is in the best possible position to collect metadata about users and their messages, because they have a complete view of the whole network at all times, compared to a node in a decentralized messaging network. So we have studied different approaches to decentralized messaging protocols, and one approach is through a peer-to-peer network. And note that when we say peer-to-peer based, we refer to a pure peer-to-peer architecture, and this shouldn't be confused with the blockchains that often use a peer-to-peer layer but with added consensus mechanisms, etc. So, peer-to-peer protocols, they commonly don't support asynchronous messaging or multi-device history. And some claim that they do, but it is shown that they use centralized components to achieve that. And then we have federated protocols, which is a different type of architecture to make it less centralized. And federated protocols, they are difficult to update once they have been used. But some protocols solve this with extensions, but extensions creates uncertainty because they are optional. So it creates uncertainty in terms of interoperability in the network. And then a big problem with federated protocols is that users can get concentrated to one or few nodes, because federated protocols, they work under the assumption that users, they expect users to have sufficient knowledge to choose which nodes to trust, and often users only choose the default node.
Another problem, which is more specific and concrete to the internet computer, is that there's not really a way to have DApp to user and user to user communication without relying on centralized and off-chain solutions. So For example, imagine that you're using a DApp on the IC that uses, for instance, Internet Identity or plug. This gives a great user experience since you don't have to provide personal information such as an email address. However, when you leave the DApp, you're unreachable. So it quickly becomes clear that IC needs a messaging layer. So today we are introducing Messity. It's an open protocol designed for arbitrary messaging. It operates completely on the Internet Computer blockchain, so it's therefore, of course, fully decentralized. It's possible to both send and receive messages directly through the protocol, and it's also built in a very scalable fashion. It can be used in a dapp's backend to automatically send messages to a user, for example, or you can use a front end to help you send the messages, such as Dbox, for example.
So, a little bit about the architecture of Messity. You can send messages from one principal to one or more principals. And we have a main canister which you send messages through. So each interaction with the protocol is through the main canister. So we only need one principal to use it. It will store the messages in what we call box canisters, which it creates dynamically as needed. And this provides with infinite scalability to the protocol. And one neat thing with this architecture that we designed is that a message with, for example, 1 million recipients is only stored once in the protocol. To get messages, you also start with the main canister, which responds with the box canister's principles, where you have your messages stored. And then you make asynchronous query calls to these box canisters to get your messages. And of course we use access control by the caller's principal. We've also made measurements and calculations to estimate the operating cost of the protocol. And we have divided it in intermittent and continuous costs. And we made an example scenario to send 1 million messages of size 100 kilobytes and to store them for 1 year. And the current cost is around $4,200. And this must be compared with Ethereum's costs, where it's more than double the cost to store 1 messages of that size.
The most used messaging application in the world, WhatsApp, have around 2 billion monthly active users so far in 2022. In 2019, over 290 billion emails were sent each day. In 2020, chat application was the most popular app category by reach. And it's sufficient to say, with all this in mind, that online messaging is a really big market.
So we're really excited to share Messity with all of you, and we have many things coming up. We want to implement end-to-end encryption to the protocol and certified query calls, and we want to continue our research around the cycles consumption and the tokenomics. Because the goal is to make the protocol self-sustainable. And we want to become an open internet service when IC allows. And this summer we're planning to hold a seed round. So make sure to follow us on messity.com and don't hesitate to contact us if you happen to have any questions. Thank you for listening.